Hey y'all, howdy, welcome to One for the Books. I'm Sandy Broadwell, and today we're going to be tier ranking the 13 books that I read this summer in June, July, and August. These books are just in the order that I read, and I have 4 categories that I've created around the letter F for some reason. Those are going to be top tier favorites, and then below that, fun, which I think is self-explanatory. I had fun with these books. Then under fun is forgettable, and then finally flops. And unfortunately, we do have a couple in all of these categories. So let's dive in. So the first book that I read back in June this year was Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. And this book was one that has been really hyped. It was very, very popular the year that it came out a couple of years ago. And it is about a woman in the 1960s, I believe, who is a very talented scientist, chemist, and gets pushed out of her field due to sexism, but ends up becoming a very popular kitchen scientist, like TV show host, and kind of pushing her agenda that way. There's some dynamics between her and another scientist that she falls in love with, and also her daughter, and what it means to be a mother in this time, trying to make it as a career woman. So I think it was interesting. I was intrigued while I was reading it, but ultimately I found this book to be pretty forgettable. So I'm surprised that it has the amount of hype around it that it had. It was good, and I would have no problem recommending it to people. But for me personally, it's not one I'm going to remember a few years from now. Next up is Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Similarly, this book is also about a woman scientist fighting against the odds, which is normally a storyline or a trope that I really, really enjoy. And Taylor Jenkins Reid did it so well in Atmosphere. This is about a woman named Joan who is a NASA scientist and astronaut in the 1980s when the very first women were being allowed to go into space. And so it's a historical fiction. Sally Ride is not a cast member, but they do mention her as being the first woman to get to go into space, and then their missions quickly follow after. And it follows Joan and the struggles that she has in this sort of work environment and having to hide pieces of herself to further her career, and what that means when a mission goes very, very wrong. So I was absolutely gripped for the story. I thought it had a really good balance of like high stakes and tension with a compelling plot and characters, and I absolutely sobbed at the end of it. This is going up in favorites. Then we have The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. This is the first book by Joe Abercrombie that I have read outside of the 9-book First Law world, and I had a good time with this one. I thought it was fun. I understand people's critiques of it, that the humor is sometimes a bit childish, but overall I still felt like it had his compelling plot, his compelling characters, honestly some unforgettable, like epic battle moments. So I had a really good time with The Devils, and I'll be looking forward to whenever the sequel comes out and finding out what happens to this motley crew. The plot of The Devils is it's set in an alternate world, kind of medieval times, and there is a priest who works for the Pope and his congregation, basically party of misfits. There's elves, there's vampires, there's werewolves. It's a wild ride. Next up, we have The Ashfire King by Chelsea Abdullah. This is the sequel to The Stardust Thief, which I read 2 years ago or 3 years ago when it first came out, and I really liked the first one, to be honest. Or at least I have very good memories of it. The original book is about a character named the Midnight Merchant, and she is really good at finding magical artifacts, and she resells them basically on the black market, and eventually her skills catch the eye of the Sultan, and he sends her on a deadly quest to retrieve an item that he thinks will make him more powerful. Ultimately, The Ashfire King was a bit of a flop for me. I was really, really bored while I was reading it. I felt like it just had never at any point did the stakes feel high, even though it should have been very high stakes. There was like world collapsing things that were happening. I just felt like I never actually felt the tension. I never felt scared for the characters, and things just kind of like seemed like they were happening because that's where they happened to be at the time. I didn't feel compelled to pick up this book while I was reading it, so unfortunately I will not be finishing out the series when the third book comes out. Next up we have Gideon the Ninth, and this is by Tamsin Muir. And this series is supposed to have 4 books. The 4th book, Alecto the Ninth, has not come out yet, but I was anticipating that it probably will come out in the next year or two, and so I wanted to go ahead and check this one off my list. My sister-in-law really loves these books, and I know a lot of people on BookTube really love this series, The Locked Tomb. So Gideon the Ninth was a pretty hilarious read, honestly. I was a little unsure how I would feel about it, not because it was confusing, which I had heard that it was, but just because I don't really love like murder mystery style stories, and this definitely had a little bit of that, but it was also a competition, which I love. It was lesbian necromancers in space, which is the kind of the tagline that you hear for that book a lot. And honestly, all of that sort of like the seriousness and the stakes were juxtaposed with Gideon's like very raw and like childish sense of humor, and I just thought that it worked really, really well. I had a very good time reading Gideon, and I would put that one actually above The Devils. Then I hopped immediately into the sequel, Harrow the Ninth, and unsurprisingly, this one is from Harrow's perspective. Harrow is the necromancer. Gideon is her like swordswoman who protects the necromancer, and I actually found this to be even better than Gideon the Ninth. I was really wowed by all of the world building that took place. In Gideon, we're trapped on this particular setting where this sort of trials or competition is taking place, and it's kind of like an abandoned Gothic ruin. Versus in Harrow, she is actually out exploring the universe a little bit, and she has been introduced to some new characters. Her life has completely changed from the first book, and I found getting to know Harrow a lot better in this book was really, really fun, but also just the world really, really opened up, and the stakes went from kind of individual stakes to kind of like big universe ending stakes very, very quickly. And I thought that that was done really, really well. There's intrigue, there's some like backstabbing that's going on, and you never really know who to trust or if Harrow can trust anyone. And I had an awesome time with Harrow. I loved it so, so much. This is going up in faves. I don't know how to compare Harrow and Atmosphere. Those books are so different. I'm gonna leave it as is for now. Then I read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. This is obviously a children's classic, and I had a goal to read at least 8 classics this year. I did not have a good time with Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I understand that it is a kid's story, and so I am not the target audience, but honestly, it was pretty boring. There were lots of parts where like new characters just getting trucked in, and like very uninteresting conversations between these characters. It felt very like Tom Bombadil in some places, if that reference makes any sense to you. And despite it being so short, I just didn't feel anything for any of the characters. And then at the end, she just like wakes up, and I think the author wants you to kind of wonder, like, was it a dream or was it real? But I just found that to be a very uninteresting way to end a book. At least maybe it wasn't back in the day when this was written, but yeah, I wouldn't recommend reading Alice's Adventures in Wonderland as an adult, and I honestly think your kids might be bored too. Next up, I read Godkiller by Hannah Connor, and I liked this book. I thought it was fun while I was reading it, but after putting it down, it was a bit forgettable, honestly. I started to pick up the second one, and as I did, I was just like, oh, I'd rather be reading something else. So I don't think I will be continuing on with this series. I mean, even though I did enjoy the first one, and I think I gave it 3.5 or 4 stars at the conclusion of it, but just now that I've stepped away from a little bit, I'm not inspired to go back to it. So unfortunately, I think this one had a lot of potential. It's following a young girl named Inara whose family is killed, and she doesn't understand why until she learns that her mother was part of a rebellion against the emperor. I'll link to my New Orleans video where I was reading this book if you want more details about how that went. But yeah, overall, unfortunately, it was fun at the time, but forgettable now that I've stepped away. Next up, I read The Turn of the Screw, which is a classic Gothic horror story by Henry James. Another one checking off the trying to read 8 classics in 2025. This was a super short read. I actually listened to the audiobook one day while I had to be out driving for work, and I listened to the whole audiobook in about 3 hours. That being said, it was interesting in sort of a classic-y way, but not interesting enough for me to really want to recommend to anyone. It got very weird. I have a vlog that'll be coming out about this in October, so I don't want to go into too much detail about it right here. But just in general, I felt like it had a lot more potential than it lived up to. For me, it wasn't a total flop. I found it a little bit interesting, but it was definitely forgettable. Next up is Nona the Ninth, and this is the third and for now final book that is published in the Locked Tomb series. Like I said, there is going to be a 4th one, but it hasn't come out yet. And I loved Nona the Ninth. It was so sweet and so good, and I just felt like Nona was such a lovable character, and the whole time that you're reading the book, you never really quite know who Nona is because she wasn't a character that appeared in the previous 2 books. And you have suspicions, but it's just a little bit cagey the whole time. And so I love how each of these books has a little bit of mystery in them, whereas the first one was a bit more intense into the murder mystery. Harrow and Nona both have mysterious elements that aren't murder mystery based, and that worked a lot better for me just based on my own preferences. But I also just really, really loved Nona, and I really want to be back in the world with her and see it through her eyes again. So this one is going way up at the top of fun. I didn't quite love it as much as Harrow, but I loved it a lot. Next up, I read Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinniman. This is, of course, the very first book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, which I hope to be reading more of very, very soon. This is a story about Earth is attacked, basically, by aliens, in that essentially the entire Earth is demolished in like the snap of a finger, and all of the remaining humans are forced into this alien survivor reality TV show setup. Carl, of course, is our main character who survives to live and fight through the trials, and his companion is his ex-girlfriend's cat, Princess Donut, who absolutely steals the show. I had so much fun reading Dungeon Crawler Carl. I fell in love with Princess Donut. I was laughing out loud. I just can't wait to pick up the next one. It is so compulsively readable. I just didn't even want to put it down. When I did have to put it down, I was still thinking about it. So for me, this might be my favorite book that I read this summer. And I've heard that the rest of the books in the series get even better, so I can't wait. Second to last on the list of books I read this summer is A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping, which I thought was in the same world as A Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by the same author, Sangu Mandana. However, after reading it, I don't think that they are in the same world. They're very similar in that it's sort of like a contemporary witchy story. The main character does forbidden magic when she finds her aunt has died out in the garden, and her aunt's only in her 50s, and so she performs a resurrection spell and brings her back from the dead. And that is absolutely taboo magic. When the Royal Society of Witches find out about it, she is basically banished and loses access to magic for pretty much the rest of her life. And so the plot is that she and her aunt run this inn together. The inn, it's sort of magically enchanted and only allows people in who are lost and who are kind and who just need a place to rest for the night. So through that, they have a lot of found family with the visitors that end up coming to the inn. And also our main character is trying very hard to get back to her magic, to figure out how to restore it, because she knows it's possible, but she just doesn't have access to any of the resources that she needs in order to do it. Of course, there's a handsome stranger that ends up staying at at the end, and there's a cute, cozy romance that goes along with it. This was a really delightful read. It was a little bit too sugary sweet for me at the beginning, but it mellowed out as the story went on, and I thought it was a really, really nice read. So I'm gonna put that one up in fun. And then finally, the last book that I read this summer was The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. And I absolutely read this just because of FOMO. This was not on my anticipated releases for the year or anything like that, but I've just heard so many people say really great things about it, and I wanted to see what the hype was about. And I was not disappointed. I had a really great time with The Raven Scholar. This is a story essentially about an empire whose rule is that every 24 years the emperor gives up their reign, and then the top 7 contenders from each of the houses competes to see who will be the next emperor. And just as that competition is getting started, the competitor from the Raven house is murdered. And so there's a murder mystery component to it as well. The Raven Scholar who is investigating the murder ends up being a competitor to replace the Raven competitor that was murdered. And there's just a lot of really cool world building and really cool mythology that goes along with each of the houses, representing sort of an animal god. There's the fox house and ox and the monkey house and things like that. And they each have very distinctive kind of lore that goes along with them. I just thought this was really great. I recently just watched Elliot Brooks's critique of The Raven Scholar, and I absolutely agree with everything that she said, but really at the time that I was reading it, none of that bothered me. So there are some definitely valid critiques, but I just had a really great time when I was reading it. I didn't want to put it down, and for me, I'm very excited to see where the story goes in book 2. The Raven Scholar is definitely going up in favorites. So that's it. Those are the 13 books that I read this summer. If you've read any of these, be sure to let me know down in the comments below what your favorite is, or if you think any of these are in absolutely the wrong category and you want to argue for why they should or shouldn't be in the category that they are. I would love to hear about that. And be sure to link as well if you did a summer wrap up. I'd love to see what everyone else has been reading this summer. Thanks so much for hanging out and tuning in. As always, please be kind, read more books, and hit the subscribe button down below for more bookish content to come.